welcome to the program.
Hi.
Now, is it Whitebear or is it like Whitebear? I don't know.
It's Whitebear.
I didn't know if you're like French Canadian. I don't know.
Thanks. Yeah, it's Whitebear.
So you're a newly doctorated doctor?
Yeah, that's right.
Is it different?
I mean, I'm not as stressed out about getting my dissertation done. So there's that part, but I'm also working on other writing projects now too that to think about, and so that's nice to like do some other things and then apply some of what I've done in community work and everything. So yeah.
So you're not done. Just because you doctor doesn't mean you're done.
You're never done. There's so many things to do.
Right? And then you got kids, so you're never going to stop doing things no matter what.
Right.
Yeah. And then future grandkids. Yeah, this is your life now.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, Lord of mercy. So I don't even know where to start because there's so much changing, but yet to me it feels like yet nothing's changing.
Right.
So I kind of want to pick apart a lot of things that are going on right now in this shared Turtle Island, as well as put out educational resources for people to learn more and understand more. You know, I don't want to sit here and lecture people for an hour. I want to give them a chance too to understand where we came to these conclusions. So
right.
Now you're doctor teacher.
I like what you just said about like how things are changing, but things haven't changed, right? Like there's always that constant, like we're still living with settler colonialism, right? That's been an ongoing thing for us, no matter what changes with that settler colonial system. Like our lands are still occupied and our people are still subjected to violence because of that occupation. So I appreciate how you frame that, and that's what popped in my mind with that.
Well, and I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer. I do want to acknowledge the progress and stuff that people are attempting to make.
Right.
But like you said, we're still, no matter what, I feel like we're only able to go this far because of, well, that's a good place to start. What is colonization or what is decolonization? We throw those terms out a lot.
Yeah, and like what is colonization? Yeah. That is when another entity comes to a land and does not acknowledge the existing knowledge systems, the existing people, the existing government structures, the cultural practices, and instead tries to replace those existing ones with the ones they brought. So in the context of North America, that was largely at the hands of Spain, England, and France, right? All these colonial countries coming over and bringing with them what they thought was a better way of life and a better way of doing things, and trying to replace what we already had, our existing structures and societies, our existing identities, and ask us to instead embrace what they brought. And that is a huge difference where people get confused around immigration and colonization, is when they bring those and try to replace with their own. And so that's basically how I like to describe colonization, as like this attempted erasure of what was already existing and what was working well. And not only that, but the relationships too with the land and each other are also interrupted.
But the Romans, I mean, that goes this concept of colonization. I feel like as long as we've been humans, somebody's trying to take over something, or is that not the case in the Americas?
I think a lot of times people try to say that that was happening in North America, and a lot of times they try to point out like the Aztecs and stuff, but not looking at there's a huge difference in what was happening back then and what is happening now as far as colonization. And they try to use that as a, well, colonization already existed here, or how tribes may have, different nations and tribes may have interacted with each other differently. And I think sometimes people use that as an excuse to justify the current iteration of settler colonialism. But I feel like it's a little bit different, because it's like that complete ownership over an area that they had never experienced before. to try to create something they think should be there instead. And so I think that is where there's a big difference. And yeah, colonization exists all over the world, and it has for quite some time. And the areas I look at the most are, of course, here in North America, and also some a little bit in the Pacific Islands, but not as much as in North America.
Well, that's the justification I got in college. I got expelled from high school because I took over a history class and told the truth junior year. And so by the time I got to college, I just sat quietly, and that was the thing. Well, Native peoples were already fighting, so we just, pushed it along, or they were already taking over each. So it's that weird, they need that to be that way to justify
Right.
speaking up.
Yeah. It's like we're just doing the same thing that was already happening. It's like way different, not even close to
Blah,
it's not the same. But like when you said what is decolonization, I like the first thing I always think of when I hear decolonization is Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang's article, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. I always highly recommend people read that article. It's accessible online, and it's not a super long read either, but they explain a lot about how it's not a metaphorical thing. It's literally about this return of lands and that return of relationships to the lands. It's not something that's this romantic idea of like we can just decolonize and keep things exactly how they are. It's like honoring people's connections, and it's honoring the nations on whose land you're on too, and looking to them for leadership. Like I live in occupied Kalapuya land here, and I always think of the local tribes that they were removed to and what their needs are, and like how can we be in relationship with them as sovereign nations, and the work that I do on campus. And so that's really important to center those folk whose land that you're on.
Well, you talk about on campus. So what is, like when I hear terms like Indian education, is it educating about natives, or is it educating natives?
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Please educate this native.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good way to think about it, actually. Like, I think you need to do a little bit of both, right? Because, like, if people don't understand whose lands they're on, like, one of my things I always say, like, I say often, I should say, is like, can you imagine how much different relationships would be with tribal nations if they taught about treaties better in schools and what sovereignty means, how crucial they are into nationhood and in the relationships between governments. Like so much things would be cleared up, like hunting and fishing rights would be so much more clear, like understanding why when people were at Mount Rushmore earlier in July, like why they should have been able to be there and not hauled off, and that they were actually like protecting their treaty rights, right? Or like no DAPL. There's so many examples, right? Like where people have this misunderstanding of what is happening and not understanding like they're asking for a treaty to be upheld and not knowing even what a treaty is, right?
Well, treaties, and I'm going to let you break it down, but what I was taught, treaties are the highest law of the land.
Yeah.
Like that is like the only thing you don't mess with is a treaty. Yet
Yeah.
California and America as a whole just has a toilet paper roll length of broken or unacknowledged treaties.
Right. Yeah, and it's in the Constitution is where it's at, right up there at the top, that treaties are the supreme law of the land. And so that's like, above all, that is supposed to be upheld the highest. It's like, according to the settler constructs that we are living with right now, that's what they say. So you would think they would be honored. You would think that would be foundational for people to learn about, but it's not. And so that's where I always get at, like, there's a lot that could be avoided. You can understand like why these jurisdictional issues because of the Major Crimes Act are leading to like the high rates of murdered and missing Indigenous women, like understanding why that is problematic and how that is not honoring that sovereignty because of the treaties. And it's just like it's all interwoven together, all our current issues with the lack of acknowledgement of treaties and the lack of education around it. So I think that needs to happen. But the other part that you said too was is it educating Native folk, right, indigenous peoples? Which one is it? And I think we have our own knowledge systems, and to bring into whether it's K-12 or to bring into higher ed, I think it's a little bit easier to bring it into higher ed just because a lot of times those voices are silenced, like you said. You got expelled, right? And I remember getting kicked out of school all the time too in elementary school for being like Columbus was a murderer and a rapist, and they're like, you need to leave. And things like that. Or talking about Thanksgiving it still happens. And but it's harder, I feel like, for kids to be in K-12 to be able to bring their truths and their knowledge systems. Like my mom tells me a story sometimes about how I was Lou keeps saying that rocks are alive, and she's like, well, in our teachings they are part of creation, they do hold life, and they're like, well, that's not true, and she needs to stop saying that. And so not allowing us to bring our own knowledge systems and teachings into the classroom is really damaging for kids. And but I feel like that does happen in higher ed too, but I feel like it happens a little bit less, and that's more of a place where people are able to explore their identities, explore who they are if they've been removed from their communities. And then as far as research goes, when I started my master's degree, I was thinking about doing something completely different, and ended up shifting into how heteropatriarchies replicated into activism, indigenous activism. I was looking specifically at Anime Akwash's murder, and then it turned into what I did with my PhD was centered on still indigenous activism, but looking at intergenerational storytelling as a counter-colonial process that we've always used. And so I felt supported in bringing that in and bringing in the teachings that I know, and learning from other scholars that have cleared that path for me too. And so I think that that's where I feel like it depends on what we're talking about when we say educate the indigenous person, right? Because we have our own knowledges that we want to educate with too. And the more of us that are able to help bring that up into spaces and become teachers for K-12 or become part of higher ed to help bring those knowledge systems in and say we're able to teach you on our own terms too.
Yeah. Well, and how many plus, I don't even want to give a number to the indigenous nations that we have in the differences, and not homogenize us either into the native with the headdress and the buffalo. Yeah. But hey, I'm in the Sierras, where's the buffalo?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is identity. You're talking about education. Well, now that ties into mascots and the imagery in the statues. So you're silenced at a young age if your beliefs are different than the norm or shape. Yeah. And then you see these statues and mascots echoing everywhere as you grow up. So you are not more than a mascot, or you're seeing images of the colonizers. Mm-hmm. And so how do you grow up to be a confident indigenous person with all this, or what's the term for that underlying silent that accepted racial imagery that we've all grown up with?
Yeah, and it's also almost this mentality that's used sometimes to justify that at least we have representation, at least it's something. And it's so sad when you frame it that way, because it shouldn't be at least. It's like you said, there's so many thousands of different cultures that are represented in North America alone. There's so many, and they're so different depending on where you're from, and even regionally there's differences with the different groups of folk. And so to lump everybody together is not only erasing all of our different differences and the beauties that we carry in our teachings, but it's replicating this image of the past that they like to do. And even though it's sometimes used as a thing where it's at least we have some representation, it's a damaging thing. It's a representation of what they think should be gone. It's like this vanishing and this like locking into this image of the past, or like this statue up of the past. And yeah, I have a lot to say about the statues coming down and stuff like that and what that means. But
Well, knock yourself out on that, because people say you're erasing history. You can't erase history. The history has happened. We are educating history. I don't see it as what Sutter did to California cannot be erased.
yeah,
Statue, no statue. So please knock yourself out, because we are smarter now. We know the truth about Columbus collectively. So why are we high-fiving that guy?
yeah.
But yes, I want you off the chain. Go ahead. I mean, if you got stuff to say about statues, please. This is about educating on our perspective. So again, there's a noose on the Placer County patch or emblem. So how is taking a noose off erasing history? Y'all hung a bunch of people, and
You want to be proud of that? It's so gross.
it is
Well,
gross.
it's like a celebration of genocide. Like, why do you want to celebrate that? Like, and they're saying they're erasing history, but they try to do that all the time, right? They erase our history all the time. Like, if you look at any history book, it's like maybe a paragraph about Native peoples, right? And a lot of the curriculum, I'm glad that there's new curriculum coming out where that'll help with that. I know here in Oregon, we have some new curriculum coming out that the tribes helped establish, but there shouldn't have to be like a state mandate to make that happen. Like, it should just be the right thing to do, to learn about whose land you're on, learn about the histories, and not this romanticized, like there was nobody here and now we're here and the past is the past kind of mentality. That's more erasive than actually teaching about it. And so, like you were saying, we live with it on a daily now. Like, we live with the effects and the impact of like this colonial encroachment on our lands, and it came in waves. And like California in particular has such a different, I think, unique history that a lot of people don't really know about. I feel like a lot of things people talk about have to do with like East Coast removal, or the way that the West expanded without looking at California, and the different ways that how fast it happened between it being Spain, Mexico, then the United States, and that pace of it happening, how that had this like devastating impacts on indigenous California. And there's so many tribes without treaties that were ratified, or that they were like, oh, they're just extinct, the way that they would document us, right, as extinct, is really, that was hurtful too, because they're like, well, they're dying off. The mentality of these people that are dying off and vanishing is just gross. And then that has lasting.
Oh, it's just gross. Sorry.
Yeah, it's gross. That's my academic term for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that word, but thank you for using it.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I'm at a loss, because we seem to teach Native history very gently to a very young age. And so what is the damage? What is the damage of teaching people about the land they're on? Because you're not trying to shame them, right? You're not trying to guilt them on you know what I mean? It's, I don't understand, because you mentioned new curriculum, but I feel and I see it being met with resistance.
Right.
And then I see people going, blah, 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 not wanting to acknowledge whose land this was. And I'm trying to understand, what's the holdup? No,
Yeah.
I'm not blaming you today.
Yeah. I think part of it has to do with like that claiming and that ownership. And it's like, nobody's trying to shame anybody. Like, we know that the people alive today aren't the ones who did XYZ, but they are definitely benefiting from it. And that's hard for people to acknowledge, right? Is that they are benefiting from the removal of indigenous people. And it's not just white people that are benefiting from that either too. And so I think a lot of times there's this thing where it's like, oh, Native people hate all white people, they want all the land back, and they're going to kick everybody out, and that's what's going to happen. I'm not the spokesperson for all indigenous people, of course, but I don't think that's the master plan behind anything. Like, we want access to the lands, we want access to our medicines, we want access to those connections, we want our ancestral migration rights back, we want all these things that have been interrupted, that people are benefiting from now, like this erasure. And if we're here, you can't justify the continued occupation. And so if we're framed as like gone or disappearing, or not recognized as even being indigenous people anymore based on whatever construct is developed, then like it justifies that occupation and nobody has to feel bad about it. But when you talk about it, people feel bad.
But we feel bad all the time. So they
Every
just
day.
feel bad for a minute, like, you know, taking a breath and going, oh, this is the history of where I lay my head at night.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should feel bad for a minute. I don't know, sorry. I get them, but you know what I'm saying?
Learning, right? Learning is uncomfortable sometimes, and like breaking habits is uncomfortable, and people don't like being uncomfortable. And sometimes that's what it takes, though, to like create changes, and that's what it takes to treat each other with basic dignity and respect, is sometimes to face things that are uncomfortable. And some folk are really resistant to that, and I don't understand it, because like you said, it's uncomfortable for us. Like, how do you think it feels for us to be like under continued occupation for hundreds of years, and like, no, you can't go gather sage because it's all been picked by like new age shops and stuff, and it's all destroyed because of climate change, the habitat. And so it's like, even something as basic as gathering sage, it's like, it's hard.
Well, you said ancestral migratory rights. What does that mean? Like, at some point they gave us the right to do something? Like, that's
Right.
it's a crazy term.
So I'm thinking about like the rights to migrate, right? Like, we did not build these weird borders between states. We didn't build these weird borders between countries. Like, these are settler colonial constructs, like the people that came to replace what we had in place. And so like when they build these things, they're like literally cutting like nations in half in some instances, right? Both in Canada and the United States, like cutting people's ancestral territories. And so that's what I mean by migration, is like they already had like not only an established area that they lived, they also had like, it's not like people didn't travel back in the day. It's like we didn't stay right where we're at. Like, this is the zone. Like, people went around and visited. Like, we like to visit now. Like, why would we not like to visit back then, and go check new places out? Like, that's not a new concept. Like, people have been doing that forever. And so why would you think
trade and ideas and stories and songs, and we're super social people.
Yeah, we didn't just stay in one spot in this little square 30-mile radius. That was it. So that's what I mean. Like, people traveled all over the place, and there's like archaeological records proving that, if people want to get really nerdy about it. And it's not like we should have to rely on that. Like, we have our own stories that talk about it. We have stories that talk about like Pacific travel to the coast, like not just in California, but like the West Coast in general. So it's like, why are those not valid? We have to wait for like the anthropology records to prove it, when we already knew that was happening. But we also have anthropology records to prove like there was travel all over the place. And so that's what I mean. Like, you can't do that right now. And it's like, it's also divided people. So if you think about like the tribes on the borders, especially, like how that creates this weird dynamic for them.
Well, and the T word wall. We don't say his name on my program.
That's
no,
it.
but the border, the southern border wall.
You're right.
Oh my gosh, there's a whole history all across there that goes up and down and up and down, and they've even had records of stuff, indigenous
Right.
occupation there, and didn't care and kept building.
Yeah.
As an indigenous person, I feel like I'm suffocating. How much do you not care? You just don't care that much. But you know what I'm saying? Like, even there, like you said, we got to wait for the archaeological record, but then we find proof of archaeological record and it still is dismissed.
Right.
So what's the point of even talking about anything if that's how it feels sometimes? It's just this suffocating chest freak out.
Yeah.
Articulate that, doctor. Not
Yeah,
diagnosed.
it's like this, like literally don't care, right? Like we don't care. That's nice. It was in the past, and it has a lot to do like with that whole idea of the vanishing. I'm going to use the vanishing Indian air quotes because I don't like referring to our peoples as like Indians as it is, but like we have our own names for ourselves. But like that whole imagery of the vanishing, like that end of the trail image that people love of the slumped over native guy on his horse. He's like, I'm at the end of the trail. I'm like, I'm defeated. This
Okay,
is it's the sunset and the sun is setting on our peoples. And so it's like really, they're like, you all are in the past. You don't matter. Your numbers are low. And it's like, wow, how gross, there's our word again. How gross is that? Like that you're you're basically saying like we want you to disappear so we can just do what we want on these lands and make it into something that we think is better than you all had at any point before. And I'm like, really? Because it's really great to have polluted waterways, and it's really awesome to have all these ravaging wildfires and all these other things that are impacted by like the destruction of land. And anyways, I'll get ranty about that, but um, it's not great.
but
Like
these
we got our own
things
ways.
that we want as indigenous cultures, everybody benefits. Like
Yeah,
you said, medicine, clean water, maybe
yeah,
free flowing fish. Like these aren't terrible things,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. And I think people get like lost in that where they're like, oh, they want to take everything away. We're like, yeah, we just want to, like you said, have clean air, clean water. Yeah, that's a basic like, yeah, we want to be able to protect the land that our ancestors instructed us how to protect and how to live with it, not to like occupy it. That's not like the end goal, right? And I think that's what people are like, we want to occupy land. That's not, we want to live with the land and like respectfully.
Maybe listen to how we did it to see how we can all do it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I'm struggling with, and it's shutting me down, the angry Indian stereotype. Like,
Right.
there she is. She's always mad about something,
Yeah.
and I've been trying to pick my battles gently
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like I can only be mad about one thing or something. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. When I was in, I think it was in elementary school, maybe early middle school, I used to have one of my Uncle John's bumper stickers that said, "Don't trust anyone who isn't angry" on my binder. So I feel you on that.
Thank you.
And but really though, like there's a lot to be angry about, and people think that we're just angry. It's like, no, we're angry because we care and we're acting actually out of a place of love and a love for our communities and our connections to the places from which we come. It's not like we're just angry to be angry. Like we're angry because there's so much to be angry about. Like nobody has any idea what it's like to walk around as an indigenous woman and know the lived realities of those horrible statistics they put out about us, or to have like a native son and understand the realities of those statistics about our native men and have to live in that fear at times. Like people don't understand like that. If they don't understand like why we're mad, like those are some of the reasons why. It's not just about the settler colonial like occupation, because that's in of itself, that's enough to be mad about. It's like people don't understand that those statistics are real people and
Well,
that they've touched every one of our lives at some point.
let's talk about some of those types of statistics. We have high rates of suicide at
Mm-hmm.
very young ages. That is a true statistic. We also have missing and murdered indigenous women, men, people.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reality. 6 years old, 5 years old, I was almost kidnapped, but I wiggled and got away, ran home. So this is not made up. This is not us just blowing something out of proportion. This is a true reality that we face as a small percentage of population with a high number of murdered and missing family members.
Yeah. Yeah. Just thinking right now, it's just such a tough one to talk about because of like how much it touches our lives. Like there's so many different levels of violence and people don't understand that and they think it's like, oh, this internal native thing. It's like, no, like you all taught this to us as what is acceptable behavior. Like if anybody ever needs to understand how settler colonial constructs like created violence within homes, they should read Deborah Miranda's Bad Indians. She really breaks it down on how the California missions in particular taught violence and as what was like how you should act. And she has a couple parts in there that she calls the genealogy of violence that are just really wow. And using like mission experts or excerpts, not experts, mission excerpts from the priest and showing an example from her own home of what they were talking about. And it's just like really powerful how she frames it. And it really helps people understand like, oh, I get this now. Like when I use that book to teach in the spring, it really helped people like understand where that came from and understand like where some of the other stuff came from, like the alcoholism and drug rates, the suicide. I can't remember, somebody said it at one point, and I liked how they framed it. They didn't say it was like, it wasn't suicide, it was death by settler colonialism. And I wish I remember who said that because I was like, that's so powerful, like this escape. And yeah, and I mean, that's another one that's definitely touched my life too this past year. And just understanding like the realities of what our youth face, especially like indigenous two-spirit youth too, have the higher rates among those statistics. And it's like, do you think it's fun to be the highest rate of everything with a small population? Like it's, people are like, what? And we're like, we're not trying to be cool. We're not trying to like win, we're not trying to win the oppression Olympics. It's just like, it's actually sucks that we have these high rates of everything.
She said the oppression Olympics.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be some kind of bumper sticker.
It's used. I'm not the one who made that up, but it describes it well because there is like a lot of times I feel like people think we're competing for the spotlight of this stuff, and it's like, we're not competing for this. We don't want it. We don't want every Native woman almost that we know to have been like sexually assaulted. Like who wants that? We don't want it. But those are the impacts of settler colonialism. And that's why like you're saying, being angry, like we have a lot to be angry about. And I think that's part of the fear is that people think that we're going to take the anger out on how, like the way the colonizers took it out on us. And that's not how we are as indigenous people. That's not how we're taught. And that's not what we want to do. We want to heal.
Yes, I want to get it out, not at somebody. I just want it out of me. Yeah. I don't need to feed it into somebody else, but there's this blah,
right,
you know, that I carry around. And part of the blah I carry around is the Indian Arts Act of 1990 was supposed to prevent people from taking our art and imagery and profiting off of it. And now that we have this worldwide internet, people are taking, and this worldwide internet is how we interact now. So us as indigenous people will share a song or art or this or that, and now it's wide open to the world to gobble up and recycle how they want. That sucks.
It's so annoying. It's all over the place.
And is it an international law, or is it only here in the United States that we're quote unquote protected?
Yeah, I like how you say quote unquote protected because it's really not. That thing is so hard to enforce, and people know that. Like, and that's the sad part is like somebody will just think, okay, let's keep it local. not like as in the cities that we're currently living or anything like that, but like local as in the context of the United States, how many vehicles are named after tribes? Like, and why are they named after tribes? Like, there's a whole bunch of them. And it was like, why is your vehicle named after somebody's like name for themselves? Or like, not, sometimes it's not their name for themselves, but it's the name that was assigned to them by the government. And so it's like, that is their name that gives them their federal protections if they're from a federally recognized tribe. So like something as basic as a name of a tribal nation used as a vehicle or as a missile or as a military helicopter or whatever it is, like why are you using all these names? It's so weird to me. Like that doesn't happen to other people. And so something like that, you can't, is not protected by that law because those companies then trademark it, right?
So
Isn't that annoying?
the Cherokee is trademarked by the car company, then Word.
I know the clothing brand was because it had the little R on it. Do you remember the Cherokee clothing line back in the day? They had them like at Mervyn's, I think, or Kmart, one of them.
It was.
I don't remember where it was, wherever it was, but it was like it had the little register, like they legit trademarked a tribe's name for themselves, and it's like, why? And so like, but you aren't protected with that law. What it does protect though is like people from saying that they are native and selling it as a native made item. If they're not a member of a federally recognized tribe or state recognized tribe, they're prohibited from doing that and they can get turned in. What you see happen more with that is individuals are turned in, but not corporations, right? So it's about people. It's not about like corporations being held accountable. And then when you take it international, that law only applies in the United States. So like all those Facebook shirts that are on all the time that I'm just like constantly like, you all are evil and blah, 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 and get mad at, they're from usually from other countries, or not usually, nearly all of them are from other countries. And so even then, even though they're violating the Arts and Craft Act, they can't be held accountable for it because they're not under the law itself because they're from outside the United States. So,
but they're literally copying and pasting parts of people's stuff into a hodgepodge and selling it and profiting off of a cause or off of a saying or off of something that some clever person made up trying to, make a few bucks and entertain us.
Well, they use the Standing Rock Tribe's logo, their tribal seal, their logo for a sovereign nation during the No DAPL movement. They were using the tribe's logo, like literally just putting it on, and they were making so much money because people were like, "Oh, it's the tribe's stuff; it's supporting the tribe," and they were just pocketing all the money. And they do that all the time. It's so annoying. Like,
so we're freezing and getting shot.
Yeah.
And feeling afraid.
Yeah.
And they're not even in the country making money.
They don't care what happens. They don't care about murdered and missing Indigenous women or their families. That's the current one that's going on right now. And they're literally taking people's artwork and reproducing it and making money. And so if you want to know where to find that stuff, like do your research. If you want to support Native people is what I would tell anybody listening. Like you need to like definitely see where the money's going. If you're supporting another Native artist, that's cool. I'm not saying not to do that. I would say like if it's something like MMIW, they should be contributing regardless of their identities to the cause, to the families, because it's not like this trendy thing to make money off of. Like it's so infuriating, that one for me. It's worse than, I think it's the worst one yet for me.
These are human beings. Each handprint to me represents like a family.
Right.
A missing person, a mom, a dad, their sister, the grandma. Do you see what I'm saying? Like each and every handprint is a family.
Yeah.
So every time you print and sell that and it doesn't go back to the family, it just makes me bananas.
Yeah.
But I want to talk real quick. What is this? And I haven't wanted to talk about it because I don't know how to talk about it. The task force. The government made a task force. They're giving us a task force.
Oh.
Like, is it even a thing, or is it just another for show, some fancy words?
Yeah, so the task force was actually established way back in November. And now all of a sudden are popping up some cold case offices. I'm really hesitant to applaud those because they're not working in community with people who are on the ground doing the work with the families that are impacted. They're not really putting their information out there. It's very behind the scenes. And this is such a huge issue, and it's like so widespread. And there can't be like, oh, we don't know what we're doing, we're the government, because clearly the government does not know how to work with Native people.
But why
With
wouldn't you jump to the resource that's already been doing it? Like,
yeah, they're not, they want to try to replicate basically. And what my worry is that they're just going to try to like basically co-op a lot of the work that people have been doing. So people on the front lines working with families and working for policy change, and say like, oh, look what we did, when it was like, yeah, people have been asking for that, like, where were you? And like, if you want to, I was like, why don't we just like do this huge judicial overhaul, like with federal Indian law, it needs to happen anyways to really address the MMIW issue. It's like, that's not even part of the conversation for them. They want to just open offices in cities that don't correlate with where the cases are. And so I'm like, why are you opening, like, I think the one that we were talking about the other evening was like the one in Tennessee. Why? Like, there's none on the West Coast. There's no offices dedicated to the West Coast. So it's like, you couldn't add an eighth office to have West Coast representation. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Within, like, with the trafficking corridors over here, it's like, why is there
all the
not?
way Canada to Mexico, like the
Yeah,
whole.
like, where is our office? You know that there has to be cold cases, and why are they only cold case offices? Those cases definitely need to be reopened, but like, there's also active cases. Yeah.
So it again, it feels like an attempt to do something, but they're still not listening.
No, they, it's like, people know what needs to happen and have been doing the work for like quite some time. It's not a new issue. It's been happening since like 1492. Like, the trafficking of indigenous women and the assault on us has been happening since contact. This is not new. And
Well,
so it's like,
that's how colonization seems to work, though, is through trying to damage women.
right. Yeah, for sure. Like, we're a threat.
Damn right. I mean, you said,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I know. We should be.
Yeah.
Should be
I
afraid.
mean, we're pretty awesome and all. So, yeah.
I can't believe this. Well, how can people, indigenous or non-indigenous, be good allies through this craziness right now?
I would say to really try to understand the issues. So when you were talking about the task force, while it seems celebratory, like, really look into it, because nobody really was really covering the protests that were happening during that ribbon cutting. But there was a lot of the one in Minneapolis, there was a lot of attention on the actual ribbon cutting itself. And I'm like, why are you celebrating a ribbon cutting? Like, why don't we talk about the people in that area that need to be found, or that have unresolved cases that have been murdered? Like, they, we cut a ribbon. It's like, okay. And so I've been like thinking a lot about the metaphors around that, like, too. And I'm still trying to process it because it only happened 2 days ago, right? And so I'm trying to like still wrap my mind around like the whole ridiculousness of like using people and cultural items as props and a celebration of something so not cool. But I would say to really look into the issues, see what people are, what they're working on. Some areas have more Native representation than others. I know like there's not a huge population of folk here in the community where I'm at, but we're here. And there's other places where people don't even realize Native folk are in their communities. And just like taking a step back and really like going, I have some learning to do. That's okay. Like, I don't know everything. I don't know anybody that knows anything. There's so many things to learn. And if we like embrace that wanting to learn more, it can go a long ways.
Well, you mentioned
Yeah.
learning. Um, decolonization is not a metaphor. I wrote down bad Indians. You mentioned another. What are some kind of appropriate resources for education right now?
Yeah, there's Oh my gosh, there's so many. How much
Okay, we'll
time?
pick four. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, if somebody wanted to start, where do we start? Because there's a lot of propaganda and nonsense.
Yeah, those two for sure I would recommend to folk just to have like a really good understanding of that. Oh my gosh, you're putting me on the spot. Um, I think that there's a lot of cool podcasts out right now. I mean, you have a show. There's
I'm a
um,
broadcast
you
baby.
have, All My Relations has a podcast that Adrian Keene and Matika Wilbur do that I recommend to people to. Um, Following like native journalists, I think, is a good way to learn more too, because a lot of times the way that we're presented in popular media is not through our own lens, and it's like the superficial way. So I know like the Pollination magazine stuff is really great, and so is Last Real Indians. Those two are both Pacific Northwest based and cover things all over the place. So I would recommend those as starters for people, and those are different mediums. Some people like short stuff, so there's a couple of great like more news type things. Then the podcast recommendation gave you a book to think
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
So there's different mediums, and so I think it's important like to just engage with different stuff and learn more.
Well, and engage us as well, because we are open to conversation as
Right.
human to human. Like you said,
Yeah,
nobody knows everything. So I don't assume to know everything about all the European cultures and subcultures, just like I don't want people to assume that they watch Dances with Wolves and now they understand me.
yeah, or Wind River.
Or Wind River, right?
One
Oh
of,
my gosh. Or Yellowstone. They get me now.
oh my gosh, yeah. So yeah, we're not all the same, and I think that's really important too. Is like when you do have those conversations, for people, don't lump us all together either. Like that's a perspective, and it's probably more than most people get in their lifetime, is that one perspective sometimes. But like just understanding that we all have our different focus areas that we're working on. um, but at the end of the day, we are offering our own perspective, and unless you're like an elected official, you're not speaking on behalf of an entire anybody.
Yep, bingo. Dr. Luhui Whitebear, is there a chance for us, or do humans just suck?
Well, just kidding. No, I think that humans have definitely shown that they can adapt and change over time. And just like we've learned all this toxic stuff that we're living with now, we can unlearn it. Our minds can be amazing things when we're open to learning. And I just encourage people to like try to work towards some kind of liberation instead of sticking with what is, because it's pretty oppressive to almost everybody, even whether or not they realize it. So
Bingo. See, I thought we were all kind of united now in this. We're screwed equally. It doesn't matter how. We're all going to die. I really appreciate your time today and your perspective. And are you writing a book? How can we support you? Like, how can we keep learning from the doctor?
I have a couple things online that are accessible, like open access stuff. So I wrote an article about the Violence Against Women Act of 2013. And that one, if you just Google my name and then VAWA, you can find that pretty easily. Um, but I don't have anything really out there yet. I'm working on some stuff, but it's not published yet. So
I can't wait. No, when things start clicking together, please keep in touch, because I feel so grateful for this time, but we're all processing this together as people.
Right.
So to have other words besides gross.
That's a great word, though.
It is so appropriate.
It is.
But to have another voice share the perspective is invaluable to me. And the effort that you put into your education isn't a selfish thing. Like, this is your brain's for all of us, and you're trying to help and educate all of us. Right. You're not just some rich doctor dentist in the hills. You are. So I just really appreciate everything.
Yeah, and just one last thing about what you just said is like one of the things I like to do is to help people understand those big words. that people like to exclude us with, because like to be able to use those words alongside other folk, they're like, oh, you do know what you're talking about. So I encourage people to like Google things if they don't know what it means. Like there's no shame in Googling something and being like, oh, cool, I didn't know that meant that. And then you turn around like I do now and be like, why are we using that giant word that just means this one simple thing? But at least now you know.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, so it's accessible. You just have to Google stuff sometimes when it comes to like some of the terminology.
Well, and ask each other too. You
Yeah,
know,
for sure.
there's a respectful way to ask questions and engage other cultures, not just
Yeah.
indigenous, you know. So I don't know. I'm going to hope and believe that we're capable of not being complete idiots and setting the world on fire.
Yeah. Yeah. But we shall see. I was like, well, fire is cleansing. Just kidding.
That's a whole different conversation.
I know, that's a different one.
Well, and again, the violence against women article one last time.
Yeah, it's just if you Google my name, Luhui, and then Whitebear. It's all one word, and then just VAWA, VAWA. You should find it pretty quickly. And you can download it. I wrote it like accessible too.
It's great because I've had different groups come on talking about domestic violence, and when they say that we didn't have that before colonization, people call and lose their mind and are so angry that how could you think that I feel, again, these are some great resources to understand. You don't have to agree with my perspective, but at least you understand where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's huge. Feeling heard is huge.
All right.
Yay. I look forward to all of it. I'm going to buy all your books and go to all your lectures and just do all your stuff.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right, Dr. Whitebear, you keep in touch because we need like 500 more of you, and I think that we can make it.
Yeah.
All right, you cookie sister, have a great day.